This greedy fatso can devour dozens of pounds of meat in a single meal. His nature is incredibly arrogant, spending his days only eating and indulging in pleasures. He even beats and tortures his servants with extreme cruelty. Though he's so useless he can't even awaken a single magic circle, no one dares to say a word. Because his mother is the queen of this country, even his father, the king, is powerless, but still can't do anything about his own spoiled son. However, during one incident while playing with a sword, the prince accidentally applied too much force and stabbed himself. How in the world did the spirit of the holy sword end up possessing and reincarnating into him? Unbelievable. The story opens with the narration of a legendary sword. Through countless centuries, I have served many different masters, helping them fight and become legends recorded in history books. And then I found my true battle partner for this life, a boy from a remote village named Leon Beck. Together, we roamed the world, overcoming countless trials. My master and I achieved unprecedented miracles one after another, destroying every monster that stood in our way, winning every battle we fought. But our journey led us to a freezing, snowy mountain, where an earth-shattering battle erupted. At this moment, my master was kneeling in the white snow, coughing up blood, his body covered in wounds and exhaustion, barely able to cling to his sword to stand. Right before him, a massive black dragon with sharp scales and blazing red eyes loomed. The giant beast let out an earth-shattering roar, unleashing destructive red lightning bolts. That terrifying power completely drained my master, leaving him kneeling in the cold snow. Yet his will never died. His iron gauntlet hand gripped the sword hilt tightly, awakening the blazing blue flame deep within the blade grew on. Standing amidst the radiant glow that dispelled the darkness, he flashed his familiar arrogant smile and said, "Let's go, my friend." He shot into the air like a beam of light, swinging his sword, delivering a fatal strike directly at the giant monster. That decisive slash ended the life of the legendary creature once and for all. My friend became the king of the entire kingdom. After achieving great victories alongside my comrade, my spirit continued to reside within the holy sword Gruon. I was kept and worshipped within the royal palace, passed down through generations of my old friend's lineage, fulfilling my promise to protect his descendants. But my peaceful slumber was suddenly shattered by noisy commotion. The sword body shook violently, greatly annoying me. Upon waking, I heard the arrogant shouting of a fat, blonde brute trying to pull me out. From now on, I am the master of this sword. The guards around panicked and rushed to stop him, demanding he return the king's treasure to its place. Hearing them call him prince, I was stunned. What? A prince? This pig? Ignoring their warnings, the fat prince still arrogantly shouted, "Silence! There is nothing in this country that I cannot touch." Utterly fed up with the scene before me, I decided to activate my judgment ability to examine the one touching me. The information that appeared left me completely speechless. Andrian Leon Beck, 16 years old, talent, useless, along with a list of terrible traits, from arrogance, obesity, clumsiness, laziness, to complete inability to sense mana. Unbelievable, the descendant of a great holy sword master could be this pathetic. Meanwhile, the fat prince was still using all his strength, panting heavily as he tried to pull the sword out, thinking, "With this, neither the king nor those nobles can look down on me anymore." To the spirit of the holy sword, the fat prince's actions were nothing but a farce. Watching him use all his might to pull me out, I thought, what a clown, daring to speak so casually. But Andrian remained oblivious. He raised the sword high and shouted delusionally, "O great dragon slayer, grant me your power." Hearing that nonsense, I was utterly disgusted. Are you insane? Why would I help someone like you? Ignoring the sword's rejection, Andrian kept shouting Gruon's name and swinging it wildly. The chaotic scene sent the guards and maids scrambling in panic. They kept shouting, "Your Highness, please calm down. You are not allowed to draw the sword in the palace grounds." But the servant's warnings only fueled the fat prince's frenzy. He swung the sword wildly through the air and shouted threateningly, "Shut up. You dare give me orders? Wanna die? Once I have Gruon's power, worthless worms like you will." But before his arrogant words could finish, Andrian tripped and fell forward. In that moment of lost balance, he could only gape in shock as he saw the sharp blade pointing straight at himself. Everything happened so fast that everyone present was frozen in terror. The holy sword Gruan had pierced straight through his back. The horrifying sight threw the guards into utter panic. They rushed over shouting, "Your Highness, call the royal physician immediately." In the midst of the palace chaos, my spirit within the sword was equally shocked. Huh? What? The one stabbed is this bastard himself? Feeling the prince's life fading away, my vision also began to blur and darken. At this rate, I might faint for the first time in my entire history as a sword. And in those hazy moments, a cold prophecy seemed to appear in my mind. If the great Prince Andrian the Gold continues to live, this kingdom has no future. Speaking of the past of Crown Prince Andrian Leon Beck, he inherited no talent from his ancestors, yet stood at the peak of arrogance. Useless but ambitious, a stupid, lazy, and brutal pig, like a dark cloud shrouding the kingdom's future. But after the prince was gravely wounded and revived from death's door, strange rumors began spreading throughout the palace. The maids whispered among themselves that the prince seemed different lately. He no longer threw things around like before, nor gathered his gang of troublemakers. He must have been scared witless by his near-death experience. One maid wondered if even the notorious crown prince had learned shame, or was he just lying low out of fear? But they all believed he'd soon return to his old ways. Meanwhile, our protagonist, now carrying the soul of the holy sword within Prince Andrian's body, completely ignored those rumors. Sitting on the luxurious armchair, he was utterly distraught and guilt-ridden upon realizing the harsh truth. He had unintentionally killed the descendant of his old friend and was now occupying that very body. Just then, a servant rushed in announcing that the king had arrived and urging the prince to quickly prepare to receive him. Hearing this, Andrian crossed his arms dismissively, muttering that the old man never visited when he was dying, so why come now? Probably to check if he was dead yet. His blunt words made the servant panic, reminding him to be careful as the royal knights were nearby. Soon after, the door opened. The man who entered was a dignified middle-aged man with gray hair and a long scar over his left eye. This was the prince's instructor. Seeing Andrian, he coldly remarked that even after returning from death's door, the prince's temper hadn't changed at all, then ordered all servants to leave, saying he didn't expect much from this student anyway. Looking at the unfamiliar man before him, Andrian could only dazedly wonder who this was. Having been a sword for so long, it was natural he didn't know anything. Approaching Andrian, he sternly asked why, despite being his teacher, the prince was now pretending not to know him. This question made Andrian immediately realize the man before him was this Bodis instructor. To avoid exposing himself, he said his memory was confused, sometimes remembering, sometimes not. Just as the atmosphere in the room grew tense, an announcement rang out from outside. His Majesty the King has arrived. At this, Andrian glanced over and thought, so the powerful man who just appeared was the real father of this bastard. Watching the king's dignified figure approach, Andrian narrowed his eyes and observed. He silently assessed that the king was far better than had expected. Head thought that over the generations, the proud lion's blood of the kingdom had been diluted, but the man before him proved otherwise. At least Head retained some of his ancestors' bearing. But the moment he arrived, the king coldly remarked that even survival couldn't change his son's attitude, not even bothering to greet his own father. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Seeing this, Count Vler H stepped in to ease the situation, informing the king that the prince's memory was currently incomplete. This news startled those present, and they began scolding the royal physician for not reporting such a serious matter to his majesty. Immediately, an order was given to summon the royal physician to examine the prince. After a thorough examination, the elderly bespectacled physician reported, "I find no abnormalities in His Highness' body. However, this may be a temporary condition caused by the psychological shock, leading to memory loss." Hearing this, the king fell silent. Andrian, sitting on the bed, also began to sweat, worrying whether the king would notice anything unusual. But the king merely smirked and said sarcastically, "How convenient. Good heavens, the father-son relationship here is truly cold, everyone." He looked straight at his son and continued with disappointment. "If you say you remember nothing now, does that mean everything you've done before never happened?" The sharp question made Andrian freeze in silence. The king spoke gravely, explaining that everyone makes wrong choices, even commits actions condemned by the world. But recognizing and never repeating them, that is the learning process of growth. His face hardened with fury. "But you've forgotten all of that. Because everything has become as if it never happened, you cannot take a single step forward from your past mistakes. And in the future, you'll never improve. The king's rage froze the atmosphere in the room. Count Vler H. hurriedly stepped in to calm the king. Meanwhile, Andrian could only grimace in silence, thinking the king was scolding him directly without any restraint. What rotten luck! Not only was he not treated like a prince, but it seemed this body wasn't even considered a normal human being. He couldn't help but wonder just how badly that Brad Andrian had lived to be so despised. Just as Andrian was lost in thought, a gentle voice called out, "Ian." The one who stepped forward and embraced Andrian was the queen. She sobbed, choked with emotion, saying she'd heard everything and knew he was confused, but to rest assured, his memories would soon return. Held so tightly he could barely breathe, Andrian struggled to push her away, thinking that the trivial past of this prince wasn't worth remembering anyway. The queen tenderly pinched her son's chubby cheeks, lamenting that she hadn't expected his beautiful face to become so gaunt. Andrian was speechless. This body was only skinny compared to a sow. Still, the queen smiled gently, expressing her utmost happiness that her son could wake up. She held him close and earnestly warned him never to touch dangerous objects like that sword again. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him forever. Watching the mother's endless worry, Andrian broke out in a cold sweat. A wave of guilt washed over him as he thought of the truth. Her real son had died by his blade. He felt this was truly a burden too heavy to bear. That night, after telling Andrian to rest and take care of his health, the queen smiled and took her leave. The door closed, restoring silence to the room. Andrian lay back on the armchair, sighing deeply in thought. He remembered his old comrade's plea to care for his descendants, yet now he himself had accidentally ended this prince's life. But since things had already come to this, Andrian told himself he must live well, for the sake of the one who had passed. After all, in his long life as a sword, had grown used to cleaning up other people's messes. One more time wouldn't hurt. Though the current body was both fat and completely talentless, Andrian didn't lose heart. He clenched his fist confidently, telling himself he just needed to rebuild his power from scratch. Because in the past, he had raised and trained countless children to become legends. To begin, Andrian decided to forge a new mana heart. He stood up, took a deep breath, and began circulating energy to focus mana. Immediately, a brilliant blue energy burst forth, enveloping his entire body. However, the joy was short-lived. The mana had gathered instantly dispersed outward. Andrian dazedly realized this useless body was completely unable to receive and retain mana. Refusing to surrender to the harsh reality, he gritted his teeth and resolved to try again. The blue flame blazed up even more fiercely. Andrian poured all his strength into forcing the energy flow into his body. But at this rate, he was afraid that if he couldn't force it in, he'd just squeeze out fat instead. But that effort quickly dissipated. The mana flickered and died. The prince's weak body immediately gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping helplessly. Andrian trembled in frustration. What kind of cursed body is this? Lying sprawled on the floor, drenched in sweat, Andrian felt utterly helpless against this bogus weakness. If this were his original form, he could have directly forced the mana in, not struggle like this. Just then, a knock on the door broke his train of thought. The maid entered the room, respectfully presenting a steaming bowl of medicine. "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion. This is a tonic sent by the queen herself. Though a bit bitter, it's extremely good for the body. Please think of the queen's heart and take it." Looking at the bowl in her hands, the maid couldn't help but worry, praying that this time the prince wouldn't just throw the medicine away like before. But contrary to her fears, Andrian stared intently at the bowl. He was astonished to sense a gentle blue energy emanating from it. This medicine actually contained mana. Without hesitation, Andrian snatched the bowl from the maid's hands and downed it in one gulp. The prince's decisive action left the maid frozen. Oh my God, he must be possessed. Slamming the empty bowl back onto the tray, Andrian coldly ordered, "Finished? Now leave." The maid stammered a reply and quickly withdrew. As the door closed, Andrian immediately focused his energy to try again. The blue mana from the medicine began to blaze up, enveloping his body. Andrian opened his eyes slightly, thinking, thankfully the medicine worked, but the accumulated mana is still far too little. Looking at the tiny flame of mana flickering in his hand, Andrian immediately called out to the maid just as she was about to leave. "Hey, Seeing the trembling maid turn back, he pointed and asked directly, "Is there more? Or not?" A few days later, in the quiet room, a brilliant blue mana flame blazed powerfully in Andrian's palm. He smiled smugly. With the mana accumulated over the past few days, Andrian poured all his strength into activating the full energy, confidently declaring, "Finally, I can create a mana heart." 4. A spirit that was once a great holy sword. Condensing a mana heart was something had done countless times. Even with his eyes closed, he was confident he could easily create one. But just as the energy flow began to circulate, a sudden intense pain struck, shocking Andrian. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest in agony. Thinking back, creating a mana heart was truly a brutal process. Old memories surfaced. His previous masters had also endured the excruciating pain of their entire body burning and their chests about to explode. So this was how painful creating a mana heart felt from a human perspective. Now experiencing it firsthand in a mortal body, Andrian truly understood. He gritted his teeth, reminding himself not to lose consciousness. Because if he passed out now, the chaotic mana would backflow and kill him. Andrian struggled to keep his mind clear, focusing all his will to control the mana mass, threatening to tear his heart apart. He mustn't rush. Slowly, he guided the energy flow through the channels around his heart to the right side. Bit by bit, ever so slowly, he regulated the new energy to gradually merge and take shape within his body. The cool blue mana began to spread like pure droplets falling onto a calm lake, completely soothing the agonizing pain. As the light gradually subsided, Andrian opened his eyes and breathed a sigh of relief. Kneeling on the floor, he murmured, "It's done. This isn't something I created to bestow upon others like in the past. This is a mana heart that belongs completely to me." Feeling the new power surging strongly within his chest, the fat prince excitedly jumped up, laughing with exhilaration. "It's done. Complete. Finally, I have a mana heart. This feeling right now is truly, yes." Just as the mana heart took shape, a beep sounded, accompanied by a floating status screen appearing before Andrian. He dazedly exclaimed, "Is this the status window?" Brilliant golden text displayed the notification, "Mana heart created." Andrian was astonished. This was the same status notification system had once used to assist his old friends when he was still a sword. He wondered why it had suddenly appeared before him now. Before he could gather his thoughts, the system continued flashing, restoring connection to origin. Andrian could only stammer, "What? Wait." Immediately after, a flood of new notifications appeared. Connection restored, but status is extremely poor and unstable. Therefore, most previous supreme privileges cannot be used. Except for a few basic privileges allowed at a limited level. Allowed but limited, what's the point? First, inspection privilege allows you to examine the qualities of targets lower or equal to your level. Next, third eye and four-directional hearing enhances vision and hearing. He curiously directed his gaze out the window to test it. Instantly, his vision changed noticeably. Every leaf, every tiny detail of the trees outside appeared with sharp clarity. Andrian nodded in acknowledgement, definitely clearer than before. Not just vision, his hearing was also amplified to an astonishing degree. Andrian began to hear the whispers of the maids standing outside the door. They were gossiping about the prince's change in character, wondering if the recent shock had made him less chaotic than before. Andrian thought, "So I can hear even the faintest sounds beyond the door." But that heightened sensitivity didn't last long before his vision suddenly went dark. Andrian jolted. "Huh?" A red warning notification appeared, alerting that all mana in his body had been completely depleted, forcing the immediate termination of all privileges. Andrian clutched his head, gasping. He clicked his tongue. So this is what extremely limited means. A wave of disappointment washed over him. He remembered the time when he was a holy sword, possessing absolute senses, able to perceive everything around him in all directions without any blind spots. But now, with this mortal body, he could only squeeze out a tiny bit of mana, just enough to eavesdrop on a few gossip sessions or see a little farther. Nevertheless, Andrian didn't lose heart. He clenched his fist, smiling confidently, telling himself that once he began expanding his mana capacity, everything would surely change. Just as his spirits were rising, a long growl from his fat belly shattered the serious atmosphere. The sound was so loud that even the maid outside heard it, and quickly replied, "I will prepare food right away." "My lord." Looking toward the door, Andrian told himself that for now, he needed to focus on adapting to this pig-like body. At the same time, in another corner of the magnificent palace, the queen was absolutely radiant. She spread her arms wide, laughing excitedly. How commendable! The queen pinched Andrian's chubby cheeks and said happily, I heard you drank every last drop of the medicine I sent. It seems you've finally learned to treasure your own body. Andrian sighed in reply. Oh, is that so? Just then, the queen turned to the dignified gray-haired man beside her and asked her son, Do you recognize who this is? Faced with his mother's question, Andrian could only answer, No, I don't. Looking at the unfamiliar nephew, the man coldly remarked, It seems he really has lost his memory. The queen stepped forward pleadingly, So you must help this child. Brother, no matter what, isn't he your only nephew? Hearing this, Andrian finally understood. The scarred man with the terrifying presence was actually his own uncle. His uncle sighed wearily, sounding as if the prince had lost something truly great. But honestly, that past was nothing to be proud of. From his attitude, Andrian could tell this uncle didn't like him at all. He stepped closer and bluntly declared, Let me make one thing clear. The only thing I can help with is reducing all that excess fat. Looking down at his round belly, Andrian could only stare blankly. Huh? Before he could react, his uncle added, I won't give you anything more than that, so don't harbor any foolish expectations. The queen breathed a sigh of relief. Even that much, I'm grateful. She didn't forget to remind her son not to forget that feeling, leaving Andrian utterly bewildered with a massive question mark. Immediately after, Andrian was thrown into an extremely harsh training regime. Under his uncle's cold gaze, he was knocked to the ground, crying out in pain. His uncle warned sternly, From now on, everything your highness eats, drinks, even breathes, is under my authority. If you still expect to be treated like a prince, forget the idea of just eating and biting without effort. Looking at the fat prince struggling on the ground, his uncle smirked challengingly. Try your hardest. Who knows, I might change my mind and teach you even one technique from our family's secret swordsmanship. That provocation made Andrian feel utterly ridiculous. He thought, someone who has trained invincible knights, and even the founding king of this country, someone like me, needs to receive swordsmanship from others? Seeing Andrian's body tremble with anger, his uncle mocked. Look at that jiggling fat. It's clear how furious you are. Without arguing, Andrian forced himself up, looked straight into his uncle's eyes, and firmly proposed. Uncle, let's make a bet. Within 6 months, I'll make you acknowledge me. He told himself. At the very least, I have to wipe that arrogant look off his face. Andrian smiled confidently and laid down the terms. If I fail, I'll do whatever you command. In return, if I succeed, you must do one thing for me. Hearing Andrian's proposal, his uncle smirked with interest. Interesting. Fine, I accept. At least this will add some drive and drama to things. Haha. But when it came to reality, things were far from easy. After running for a while, Andrian was already out of breath, drenched in sweat. He cursed this damned fat body while gasping for air. To keep going, Andrian decided to channel the blue mana to his feet, focusing on burning away the excess fat throughout his body. Witnessing this from behind, his uncle was utterly amazed. He rushed forward at blinding speed, grabbing the prince's shoulders and tremblingly asked, Andrian, your highness, have you truly created a mana heart? Already? Andrian smirked smugly. Oh, this thing? I did it a while ago. Having second thoughts about the bet already? Contrary to his self-satisfaction, his uncle's face turned deadly serious. He pressed. What were you thinking, creating a mana heart? Where did you learn this mana heart refining method? Judging by your expression, you don't even realize what you did wrong. Seeing Andrian still clueless, the count shouted bluntly. That mana heart is nothing but a low-grade technique, the kind that B-rank mercenaries learn. His uncle's explanation left Andrian completely frozen. How many years was I asleep? Did I become a time capsule, everyone? The prince's panicked scream echoed through the entire castle, startling the birds into flight. What? Andrian stood frozen, sweating profusely at what he just heard. He thought, this truly is the end of an era. The shocking news made Andrian cry out in disbelief. What do you mean by that? Instead of explaining further, his uncle said coldly, Let me show your highness directly. Watch closely. Immediately, he began channeling a brilliant blue magical energy around his arm. Watching the energy move, Andrian narrowed his eyes and noticed something strange. The mana was automatically forming concentric circles. Before he could gather his thoughts, the Count swung his hand, releasing a devastating pressure that slashed straight ahead. The power was so immense it created a loud explosion. Watching the mana fragments float and dissipate, Andrian realized in horror that this type of mana chain possessed the property of completely suppressing the aura created by a mana heart. Standing before the prince, his uncle calmly explained that it wasn't only stronger, it was also easier to use and far more stable than a mana heart. The Count continued explaining the history. Even the Yi family, those who stubbornly clung to the ancient mana heart technique, had completely declined a century ago. Now, across the continent, no one bothers using mana hearts anymore. To verify for himself, Andrian sought out ancient texts. Holding a book on the basic theory of magic, he carefully read each line recording the origins of this technique. From its founder Ernestin Qingguan to later generations of successors, Andrian sighed bitterly, acknowledging the harsh truth. Times have changed. What I once had is now completely obsolete. Andrian gradually understood the power system of this new era. Unlike mages who used complex magic circles, modern knights instead condensed mana into chains to focus their power. A knight's level was now determined solely by the number of mana chains they could weave, starting from 1 chain, 2, 3, 4, up to the supreme realm of 5 chains. Line 227 continues from 226. Closing the book with a dry snap, the fat prince pondered deeply. He told himself, so my uncle's words weren't meaningless nonsense at all. Staring intently at the text on the page, Andrian murmured thoughtfully, this name is truly familiar, as if I've heard it somewhere long ago. Distant memories suddenly flooded the Holy Sword Spirit's mind. Back then, when he was still in the form of a proud holy blade, a silver-haired man in a black cloak had come seeking a duel. He called himself Ernestin Qingguan, arrogantly declaring he wanted to test who was worthy of the title Holy Sword. That man had used strange techniques, neither ordinary swordsmanship nor magic. Andrian smiled to himself, realizing that the familiar-sounding name belonged to that eccentric from long ago. He wondered what had become of that man. He must have amounted to something to have written that book. The next morning, as Andrian was stretching in the courtyard, his uncle approached from behind. He crossed his arms and asked directly whether the prince had finished reading the book last night. Then surely you understand the situation and realize how foolish your choice was. But contrary to his uncle's expectations, Andrian simply smirked. He crossed his arms confidently and replied, how strange. I don't feel I've made a single mistake. At all. The nephew's stubbornness made his uncle sigh wearily. He wondered whether the prince was being deliberately obstinate or truly still didn't understand the essence of the problem. Unexpectedly, Andrian replied that not all mana hearts are the same, then released a massive magical energy enveloping his entire body, fundamentally different in caliber. Have you ever heard of this? Looking straight at Andrian with a stern gaze, the Count bluntly criticized his sophistry. He said that among mercenaries, there were occasionally delusional types who imagined themselves heroes from centuries past, like the prince. But their endings were all pathetic. None could surpass 2 chains and quickly fell into ruin. Facing the fat prince standing silently, he issued a provocative challenge. If your highness truly is different from them, then try defeating a single chain knight. If Andrian succeeds, I will become your guardian as the queen wishes. Hearing this, Andrian chuckled challengingly, wondering if having an uncle like that as a guardian would really be a good thing. That arrogant attitude annoyed the Count. He stepped forward, blue mana blazing fiercely around his body as he proudly declared his status. A Count of the Kingdom, commander of the Northern Corps. I am the leader of the Black Spear Knights, one of the 5 great knights serving His Majesty. The brilliant blue mana transformed into 4 massive magical chains surrounding his body. That was Vler H, a legendary 4-chain knight, the one who would later stand behind the prince. Facing the suffocating pressure of 4 mana chains, Andrian gritted his teeth and endured, despite the sweat pouring down. Just then, the royal guards suddenly burst in, drawing their swords to protect the prince from the overwhelming killing intent. But Andrian immediately ordered them to stand down, not wanting anyone to interfere in this confrontation. Witnessing his nephew's resolve, Vler H smirked with amusement and withdrew his magic. Andrian looked at his uncle with a challenging smile, warning him not to break his promise later. The harsh training that followed drained every ounce of the Fat Prince's strength. Oh God, how many pigs did this guy eat? After the session, Andrian lay flat on the floor, gasping for air. When Vler H announced the end of training, he could only drag his exhausted body back to his room, leaning on the table as he tremblingly told himself, I nearly died. Count Vler H sneered at his nephew's confidence. He coldly poured more cold water. Your Highness, with that level of determination, you expect my recognition? Absurd, two-chain? You might not even beat a single chain knight. After the brutal training, Andrian's fat body dragged itself through the palace corridors, muttering resentfully, that damn demon old man. Just as he opened the door to his room, the royal physician was already waiting inside. Seeing Andrian, the elderly physician bowed respectfully. Andrian asked in surprise why he was here. The physician smiled, saying he was honored that the prince remembered him, and he had come on the queen's orders to perform healing magic on him. The moment he saw the physician's brilliant green healing magic, Andrian panicked and shouted, No, I don't need it. Get out. Ignoring the physician's confusion, he shoved him out into the hallway and slammed the door. Standing in the room, Andrian gasped in anger. He thought, if I use healing magic to erase this fatigue now, all the pain and muscle-building effort from today will be meaningless. During dinner, as Andrian was enjoying his meal, the dining room door suddenly burst open and a mocking voice called out, Brother, are you here? The one who entered was a young brown-haired man in a luxurious red royal outfit, with an extremely arrogant demeanor. Andrian paused his spoon mid-bite, chewing and staring blankly, wondering who this was. Seeing the prince's expression, the attendant beside him leaned in and whispered, This is the third prince. The third prince casually approached the table, sneering provocatively. I heard you had an accident. Thought you'd gone to meet our ancestors. What a pity. Despite the rudeness, Andrian continued eating calmly and asked coldly, So what do you want? Or did you just come to cause trouble? Is the prince that free? The question hit a nerve, darkening the third prince's eyes with anger. He inwardly scorned the fool who had stabbed himself with his own sword. However, he quickly regained his sinister composure and said slowly, I heard an interesting rumor. They say you bet with Count Vler H that you duel a two-chain knight. Then, the third prince leaned close to Andrian, smirking challengingly. About that, how about I be your opponent? As soon as the third prince left, Andrian turned to ask the knight beside him. Who was that just now? He thought. How can the descendants of the Leonby bloodline have such a contemptible, hateful face? The knight explained politely. The third prince Julian has been famous as a sword prodigy since childhood. Hearing this, Andrian raised an eyebrow in surprise. What, that guy? The knight continued that Julian had even created 2 magic circles at only 14, an astonishing rate of advancement. Andrian chuckled to himself. Oh, that impressive? No wonder his face is so arrogant it's reached the moon. Just then, the dining room door burst open and the maid rushed in carrying a towering stack of letters. She trembled. Forgive me, Your Highness, sorry to interrupt, but you have letters. My lord. Andrian stared blankly at the stack of letters, wondering why those who had never bothered to look at this useless prince were now suddenly sending letters so urgently. He curiously pulled one out to read. Every single letter contained the same content, a challenge. Some begged for a match, others offered to be training partners, all wanting to use this opportunity to formally teach the fat prince a lesson. Understanding their intentions, Andrian grinned slyly. He immediately handed the letters to the maid and ordered, Hey, write down the names of everyone who sent me these letters. I'm not letting this go without payback. Hee. The next morning, a dry thud sounded as a wooden sword was thrown down before Andrian. Vler H stood opposite, coldly ordering, Pick it up. At least learn some basic swordsmanship so the bet will be valid. I don't want to hear the excuse that you lost because I never taught you the fundamentals. Andrian thought his uncle certainly had an unpleasant personality. He could have just quietly taught swordsmanship. But the moment he bent down to grip the hilt, an agonizing pain shot through his entire body. The severe muscle pain from yesterday's training made him cry out involuntarily. Witnessing the fat prince scream just from touching a wooden sword, his uncle could only exclaim in shock, Wait. Seeing Andrian's intense reaction, he pressed in surprise. You didn't receive healing magic? Andrian endured the pain and replied bluntly, You're a knight. You should know better. If I receive healing magic, The muscles will immediately revert to their original state and can't develop. All my training effort would be wasted, uncle. The fat prince's knowledgeable answer left him frozen for a moment. He smirked in acknowledgement. Right. Then he turned away and coldly said, All right, that's not the main issue. With that, the count drew his sharp sword and warned sternly, I don't want to teach twice. Watch carefully. Under Andrian's focused gaze, he began channeling energy. A brilliant blue mana flared up, enveloping his body and blade. He introduced firmly, This is the kingdom's foundational swordsmanship, what royal knights learn when building their foundation. Immediately after, he swung his sword in a series of movements that were both fluid and devastating. The tremendous power and speed created powerful gusts that swept across the training ground. The final slash descended, creating a massive pressure explosion that cleared the surrounding dust. Witnessing the entire masterful demonstration, Andrian was completely stunned. He stood frozen, his hair flying wildly. Sheathing his sword, his uncle let out a relaxed breath. Andrian gripped the wooden sword tightly, asking in disbelief, You just said this is the foundational swordsmanship knights learn? In response to his nephew's shock, the count simply clicked his tongue, glancing at him with a cold, meaningful look. He slowly sheathed his sword and explained that while this swordsmanship was for training and lacked sharpness, it was absolutely faithful to the fundamentals. Given the prince's terrible talent, this was already more than worthy for him to learn. Hearing this, Andrian suddenly covered his face and burst into hearty laughter, leaving his uncle utterly bewildered. Old memories instantly returned to Andrian's mind. How ridiculous! The great swordsmanship that once slew the mad dragon, the Dragon Slayer's sword, is now considered mere foundational training by people today. Seeing his nephew laughing strangely, he continued that learning only this much certainly wouldn't be enough to win the bet. After finishing the basics, he could ask his mother to find him another teacher. But Andrian immediately cut him off, insisting he didn't need to learn any other swordsmanship. This was more than enough. Facing the prince's stubbornness, the count glanced at him skeptically and said to do as he pleased. Meanwhile, Andrian silently gripped the wooden sword hilt until it creaked. Andrian immediately swung the sword in a powerful slash, creating a strong gust. But his fat, aching body quickly forced him to lean on the sword, gasping for breath. He told himself that it was only natural for people today to consider the Dragon Slayer sword a mere training technique, though he hated to admit it. Because over time, the Dragon Slayer sword passed down to later generations had completely lost its dragon-slaying will. It had been stripped of its core essence. For those who had abandoned their spirit and forgotten how to infuse will into their blade, they would never have the insight to recognize the true value of the Dragon Slayer's sword. Just as Andrian was lost in thought, a dry slap rang out. Vler H used his wooden sword to strike and correct his posture. He sternly reminded him that only putting force into his arm wouldn't transmit power to the sword. Had he already forgotten everything had just demonstrated? Put the force into your belly, into your legs too. His stern shouts rang out along with repeated strikes of the wooden sword against Andrian's body. The fat prince could only let out pained grunts as he collapsed. His uncle loomed over him, continuing to warn, You must channel power precisely throughout your entire body to swing the sword properly. Lying on the ground gasping, Andrian thought, Right. Even though my current body is so weak that even mimicking a fake Dragon Slayer sword is clumsy, I will still prove that the Dragon Slayer sword is not some old scrap that can be thrown away like a worn-out shoe. I can't let these younger generations look down on it. That determination became the fuel for the next period of grueling training. And so a week passed. Under his uncle's cold supervision, Andrian kept running, swinging his sword under the harsh sun, sweating like rain. At night, he sat cross-legged, focusing on circulating the gentle blue mana throughout his body. And so a month quickly passed. His extreme persistence finally bore fruit. The system suddenly displayed a flood of congratulatory notifications. You have successfully transformed your physique through rigorous training. The trait severe obesity has now been reduced to moderate obesity. Your metabolism has become more active, helping Andrian gradually become accustomed to using his body. In particular, the clumsiness trait completely disappeared, significantly increasing training efficiency. The changes didn't stop there. Thanks to the steadily accumulated mana, the annoying mana sensory disorder trait was removed and replaced with normal mana sensitivity. Feeling his new power, Andrian smiled excitedly. He swung the sword continuously, each movement now much more natural than a month ago. Though drenched in sweat and muscles aching, Andrian kept telling himself, stronger than yesterday, more perfect than a moment ago. Didn't you hear me say stop? His uncle's stern shout echoed through the pouring rain. On the training ground, the wooden sword in Andrian's hand shattered into pieces under the tremendous pressure. Despite the roaring wind and rain and lightning streaking across the sky, the young prince stood alone in the downpour, his hand gripping the broken hilt until it bled. Fresh red blood mixed with rain, dripping onto the cold ground. He raised his rain-soaked face to look at his uncle approaching. Andrian spoke wearily. Behind him, the sturdy wooden training post had been split in half. Faint scorch marks still crackled with sparks. It turned out Andrian had poured all his spirit into a single slash that exceeded the limit of an ordinary wooden sword. True will can move mountains. Seeing the completely destroyed training post, his uncle was shocked. But immediately after came fury at his nephew's recklessness. He rushed over, gripping Andrian's shoulders and shouting, "You idiot, training in this weather? If that had been a real sword, you'd be in serious trouble." Andrian could only silently endure his uncle's wrath. His hands were now trembling violently, bruised and bleeding from days of continuously pushing his body beyond its limits. Just then, a system chime sounded. A brilliant golden notification appeared before Andrian. You have fully awakened from extreme focus, but your body still remembers the sensation and has successfully formed a new trait, super focus. His consciousness faded, and his exhausted body collapsed forward. The knight behind him shouted in panic, "Your Highness." Line 365 continues. Under the pouring rain, his uncle silently looked at his nephew's unconscious, pale face in his arms. The northern commander's usual stern gaze softened, replaced by a hidden respect for the prince's iron will. He sighed softly, "You stubborn brat." Just as he woke up on the soft royal bed, Andrian opened his eyes and realized had lost consciousness. He sat up wearily, scratched his head, and sighed at himself for underestimating this pathetic boat's limits. Lying in bed, he couldn't help but reminisce about his past life. When he was the great holy sword, he had achieved every peak accomplishment, accompanying nameless heroes, swordsmen, mercenary kings, and even the founding king. He had led them through countless battles to victory, guiding their bodies and souls to forge legends. He had always quietly stood by them, taking it for granted. But no matter how wise a strategist or outstanding a teacher he was, in the end, he was always an outsider. Watching others shine, looking at his calloused, bruised hands, Andrian felt a strange joy. It was precisely because he didn't want to be an outsider anymore that he swung his sword in mad training, to experience the feeling of sweating and achieving results for himself. However, he also understood that if he kept rushing like this, the fat prince's weak body would soon collapse. He needed to quickly find the perfect balance between spirit and body. More than a month had passed since Andrian formed his mana heart. Sitting cross-legged in meditation on the bed, he noticed his accumulated mana was now plentiful enough to proceed to the next stage. Andrian began focusing his energy, channeling the brilliant blue mana throughout his body. Immediately, the system displayed a congratulatory notification that his persistent efforts had accumulated mana to a certain level. The energy continued to flare more powerfully, followed by the notification that his mana heart had expanded, allowing his body to now withstand far greater amounts of mana than before. Truly, perseverance pays off. The expansion of his mana heart also brought about a dramatic change in the prince's physique. Feeling the new power surging, Andrian opened his eyes wide. His new body, brimming with vitality, left him extremely satisfied. Andrian glanced toward the corner where the training sword rested on its stand. He smiled to himself. Now then, let's see. The moment he grasped the sword, a beep sounded along with the system notification. You have reached the level of sword initiate. You can now use the most basic energy aura. The blue mana immediately blazed brilliantly, enveloping the entire sharp blade. Watching the magical flame dance in his hand, Andrian smiled confidently. With this basic level of power, he could now begin practicing the most fundamental techniques of a true swordsman. News of the fat prince's transformation spread quickly as Andrian stood on the training ground. Vler H approached and informed him that rumors of his insane bet were spreading through the kingdom like wildfire, causing him quite a headache. The count advised Andrian to quickly find an opponent to train with. Hearing that, Andrian simply smirked slyly. immediately thinking of the third Prince Julian's arrogant face and replying, "Oh, I've already decided on my training partner." Andrian further explained to his uncle that directly facing a two-chain knight was too much at his current level. He wanted to start training against single-chain opponents first. Receiving his uncle's indifferent approval, Andrian turned to call Carr, his loyal attendant, to ask about what had been entrusted. Carr quickly presented a stack of documents, reporting that he had arranged the list of challengers as requested. He asked whether the prince really wanted to fight them just because they'd provoked him. In response to Carr's question, Andrian calmly retorted, "What if I do?" Carr hesitantly explained that most of those on the list bore deep grudges against the former prince and would likely use the sparring as an excuse to harm him. Hearing that, Andrian only smiled meaningfully, saying he knew that perfectly well. He turned to Vlr and asked him to referee the matches. Slinging the sword over his shoulder with a bright smile, the fat prince firmly declared that he asked for nothing major, only that his great-uncle ensure no one died in the matches. A few days later, the day of the first match finally arrived. Standing before the grand palace gates of the crown prince, a young man with a face full of hatred muttered softly, "So this is the crown prince's palace, where that piece of trash lives." His name was Taylor Tellum, a second son of an ordinary baronial family. Memories from a few years ago suddenly flooded back into Taylor's mind. At that time, during a lavish royal banquet, the fat crown prince Andrian had pointed straight at Taylor's father and older brother, laughing insultingly before the crowd. Look at that pathetic sight. The arrogant prince kept hurling insults. Their clothes and attitudes reek of country bumpkin, getting so excited just to attend a royal banquet. Good heavens, what an embarrassing history for this pig. The public humiliation had deeply shamed Taylor's father and brother, leaving an unforgettable scar. The family's honor fell to the lowest depths, and to this day they were still mocked by other nobles. Taylor's eyes burned with blood-red fury. He ground his teeth, calling Andrian's name, vowing that today he would make that trash prince pay a heavy price. Back in the present on the arena, Taylor swallowed his anger and stepped forward to bow. "Your servant, Taylor, requests an audience with your highness." Crown Prince Andrian Leon Beck. Taylor drew his sword formally and continued introducing himself. "I am the second son of House Tiam. I am a single-chain squire knight, practicing the swordsmanship of House Tiam." But before he could finish, Andrian cut him off rudely. "It's just an informal sparring match. No need for all that formality." Not stopping there, the fat prince turned and whispered to his attendant in a contemptuous tone, "He's really a knight? Looks so weak." The arrogant attitude made Taylor furious. He thought, just as the rumors say, this prince is rude, arrogant, and utterly lacking in decorum. Line 412 continues. Just as the atmosphere was about to explode, Vlr stepped in. "Enough? I understand your feelings, but the match hasn't even started. Control your aura." The moment Taylor saw the legendary commander, his anger vanished, replaced by overwhelming admiration. He quickly bowed deeply with utmost respect. "It is an honor to meet you, sir." Witnessing the scene, Andrian clicked his tongue, thinking that his uncle was the one who really seemed like the prince here. Taking the chance as he passed Vlr, Andrian couldn't resist mocking. "You should have behaved better in the past." The remark made the fat prince frown and reply, "Don't keep bringing up the past." Not letting them argue further, Vlr stepped to the center of the arena and decisively ordered, "Both of you, to your positions." Truly exhausting dealing with these two, all talk. The match officially began. Facing Andrian, Taylor immediately channeled a brilliant blue mana throughout his body. His face showed clear disgust as he smiled coldly in provocation. Then, "Your Highness, please be careful." With that, Taylor shot forward, swinging a powerful slash straight at the fat prince. But the attack speed of a single-chain knight was nothing but clumsy movements in the eyes of a former great holy sword. Andrian remained completely calm, easily raising his sword to block, and noted, "Too many wasted movements." The powerful clash created a massive shockwave. Taylor was stunned to find his blade completely stopped by the blazing blue mana on his opponent's sword. He thought in shock, This is a mana heart?" Before he could recover, Andrian decisively swung his sword, deflecting the attack. The powerful push sent Taylor stumbling backward. Regaining his footing at a safe distance, Taylor broke into a cold sweat, unable to believe his eyes. He told himself that mana hearts were low-grade techniques. They couldn't possibly block mana chains. Perhaps it was only because he was just single-chain. Meanwhile, Andrian calmly looked at his blazing sword and murmured, just a little tingly. Suddenly, a strange vibrating sound emanated from Andrian's blade, startling Taylor. At the edge of the arena, Carr and the other knights were also stunned. A sword that makes sound? Could it be that even Vler H had lost his usual composure? He broke out in a cold sweat, shocked to recognize the legendary phenomenon of sword resonance. Unable to accept that he was being suppressed by a useless fool, Taylor desperately gripped his trembling sword. He shouted in fury, "Impossible! That can't be!" Carrying his rage, Taylor charged straight at Andrian once more, pouring all his strength into rapid slashes. Facing his opponent's fury, Andrian calmly parried. The two blades clashed fiercely, leaving Taylor only able to roar in frustration. Dust filled the arena. Facing his opponent's fury, Andrian remained perfectly calm, using his mana-clad sword to block. He thought, "They say mana from circles and mana from the heart are polar opposites. That seems true. It feels like the mana could backflow at any moment." But then he smirked. Looking at Taylor panting in anger, he pointed his sword at his opponent and said calmly, "Baron's second son, right? I suggest you lower your temper." With that, Andrian half closed his eyes, focusing all his senses to sink deep into his consciousness. Within the deep watery space, he called upon the awakening of the demon's sword. The holy sword, or countless other names had been called before, all were part of his soul. When his hand touched the light at the water's bottom, Andrian's mana heart received an immense will. Upon the colorless mana heart, a single color began to be applied. The sleeping will of the Dragon Slayer had awakened. This was the most recent memory of the sword, carrying the essence of a heart forged to slaughter dragons. The moment the Dragon Slayer's heart was activated, Andrian's eyes suddenly turned blood-red with bloodlust. A crimson-purple murderous aura surged violently from his body, manifesting the image of a massive red dragon roaring with power. This was the true power of the Dragon Slayer's sword, forged with the sole purpose of killing dragons. The energy surging from the Dragon Slayer's heart had completely merged with the Dragon Slayer's sword. Witnessing the destructive aura looming before him, Taylor trembled in pure terror. He broke into a cold sweat, stammering, What the hell is that? Am I facing a monster?" Realizing the extreme danger that could take a life at any moment, Vler H, watching from outside, immediately changed expression. He rushed in shouting, "Stop! Now?" But Andrian was completely consumed by killing intent, charging forward at terrifying speed. Vler H shouted in alarm, "Stop! That sword is dangerous." But few knew that before this match, Andrian had privately asked his uncle for a special favor. When Vler H asked what it was, the prince only smiled meaningfully. Andrian said seriously, "If it looks like I'm about to kill my opponent, you must stop me." Immediately, back to the present moment, as the brutal aura of the Dragon Slayer completely consumed Andrian's mind, turning him into a beast charging at Taylor. Vler H didn't hesitate. He immediately channeled his blue mana chains and rushed into the arena to stop his nephew before tragedy struck. Fortunately, had warned his uncle beforehand, otherwise Taylor would have been dead. The Count's thunderous blue mana clashed directly with Andrian's crimson aura, creating a devastating pressure explosion that blasted the surrounding debris. As the dust cleared, Vler H stood tall, his sword still crackling with electricity. Meanwhile, Andrian had been slammed straight into the corner wall, sitting slumped on the ground in utter exhaustion. The stone wall behind him was severely cracked. Seeing the prince knocked down, the royal knights immediately drew their swords and surrounded Vler H. They shouted furiously, "Count, what do you think you're doing? You could be punished for attacking royalty." But Andrian immediately spoke up to stop them. "Stand down. I asked him to do that." He forced himself up, wiping the dirt from his face, muttering resentfully, "I did ask, but I never said to knock me flat on the ground." With that, the exhausted prince collapsed again, startling the soldiers. Though he survived, when he felt his body again, Andrian was shocked to realize a terrifying truth. His mana heart had nearly shattered under the immense pressure from the Dragon Slayer's will. Even the Count himself had been forced to directly withstand a powerful full-force blow from him. Fortunately, the prince's body didn't seem to suffer any long-term effects. Andrian sighed in relief, thinking that at least everything had turned out fine, and had even won his first match. Seeing the fat prince sitting there smiling to himself, Vler H coldly asked, "Why is your highness Laughing? Andrian was startled. What? He asked why his uncle had suddenly appeared. The Count's face hardened with seriousness. He demanded to know what Andrian had been thinking, using that corrupt and degenerate swordsmanship, because he had never taught such a brutal technique. Facing his uncle's accusation, Andrian remained calm, replying firmly, I only acted according to the true nature of the blade. The answer left Vler H speechless. He thought, hearing someone who's never experienced real combat talk about the nature of the sword is ridiculous. But looking at the crimson killing intent that had once blazed from the prince, he had to admit that what had spoken of was indeed killing intent. That raw killing intent made others uneasy, but it was still a solid survival truth among the many truths on the battlefield. His uncle's understanding surprised Andrian. Had expected a lecture about the path of the sword lies in perfecting the blade, or some similar hollow philosophy. Smirking, Vler H bluntly declared, I am not a knight. I am a soldier. I don't walk the path of justice, but the path to victory. However, his expression immediately darkened, sternly warning Andrian that his current sword was far too dangerous. When the bloodlust swells too strongly, it will blind both yourself and your enemy, leading you astray. Andrian sighed, explaining to his uncle that was exactly why they needed to train to overcome those current flaws. Hearing that, Vler H crossed his arms sternly and coldly declared he would continue watching to see whether the prince would be consumed by the demon of killing intent within. And so, 3 days of continuous sparring passed. On the training ground, a wooden sword stood planted in the earth. Andrian looked at his opponent before him and called, Taylor, right? Slinging his sword over his shoulder, the prince smiled and commented that Taylor had tried very hard over the past 3 days. In truth, for Taylor, enduring an unrestrained blade full of killing intent for 3 straight days was nothing less than the ultimate torture, both physically and mentally. Andrian clicked his tongue in mock regret, sarcastically remarking that Taylor must have really wanted to kick him before this ended, but too bad he couldn't. His words left Taylor stammering in denial. Just then, Andrian turned to receive a finely carved wooden box from the maid. Looking at the box presented before him, Taylor asked blankly, Your Highness, what is this? Andrian explained solemnly. He knew that Head once committed unforgivable wrongs against Taylor's family. Though he didn't know if this gift was enough to make amends, he wanted Taylor to take it to Barentium. Inside the box was simply a teddy bear and a simple apology letter. Line 500 continues. Receiving the prince's sincerity, Taylor turned back emotionally and shouted gratefully, Thank you, Your Highness. News of the Mad Prince's sparring matches quickly spread and became the hottest topic in the kingdom. Everywhere in the palace, nobles whispered with glee, believing that Andrian's arrogance had finally dug his own grave, and that he would pay dearly for his past sins. They eagerly awaited the moment the fat prince would be humiliated. But day after day passed, and the scandal the nobles had been hoping for never materialized. When someone curiously asked about the match results, the knights who had faced Andrian surprisingly came to his defense. They excitedly shared that everything was just a misunderstanding. The crown prince was actually not as bad as the rumors said. Everyone brightly affirmed that both sides had given their all and fought fairly. And through the matches, they learned His Highness wasn't as wicked as they'd thought. Of course, the nobles didn't believe a word of it. The truth about Andrian's fair sparring matches was maliciously twisted. Surely the royal family must have paid them off. The news quickly reached Andrian, making him slam the table in anger. Paid off my ass. They're just embarrassed about losing. The nobles are useless. Why can't they do something productive for once? Back to Taylor, who was now trembling as he clutched the royal gift box. Andrian stepped closer, slapped his shoulder firmly, and growled, Next time you go out, make sure to boast plenty about the match results. Got it? Taylor could only sweat and bow. Yes, Your Highness. Andrian crossed his arms smugly, thinking the stupid rumors outside would soon die down. But he was quickly doused with cold water when the maid rushed in to report. Andrian asked blankly, What? The maid hesitantly explained, That rumor. They're spreading that Your Highness threatened everyone to falsify the match results. Hearing this, the fat prince could only stand frozen, speechless at the complete distortion of public opinion. Andrian's face darkened beneath his hair. He clicked his tongue and told himself, Fine, whatever. He'll just keep training. Not bothering with baseless rumors. Andrian immediately focused all his energy. A brilliant blue mana blazed fiercely, enveloping his body. Carrying his iron resolve, Andrian launched into a new cycle of mad training. He swung the sword repeatedly. The speed and power of the prince's slashes were now much faster and more precise than before, showing remarkable progress. As the final sword stroke traced a blazing blue arc before fading, Andrian breathed heavily, the mana gradually retracting into his chest. He turned to ask his loyal attendant, "How many sparring opponents are left today?" Carr glanced at the documents and respectfully reported, "Today's opponent is the last one." "Your Highness," Andrian sighed in slight disappointment. "So the squires no longer dare to challenge me?" Carr smiled slightly, explaining that at least the final opponent was a true knight. Someone who not only trained in his family's techniques, but had also joined a famous knight order to better hone his skills. Hearing this, Andrian smirked with interest. "Oh?" He murmured the name had just read in the documents. A squire knight of the Iron Legion, on Kurgan. At the same time, at the arena gates, the large wooden door slowly opened, and a dignified figure in gleaming silver armor began to enter. The royal guards on both sides couldn't help but whisper, "Is that her?" Another nodded. "Based on the emblem on her armor, it's definitely her." People often compared her to a flower on a cliff, a thorny rose full of pride. A woman rumored to have broken countless men's hearts. Awe's steady footsteps drew every gaze from the surrounding soldiers. They whispered in admiration, "She really is beautiful. I can't believe even a woman like her would come here herself." Another chuckled meaningfully. "The crown prince certainly has quite the pull, doesn't he? Either way, if the prince loses to her in front of everyone, I'll be quite the spectacle." The Iron Legion was one of the kingdom's premier knight orders, renowned for both prestige and power. On Kurgan, an outstanding squire knight of this order, had even been confirmed as a full member thanks to her natural talent. Faced with this information, Andrian couldn't help but wonder, but why would someone so talented come looking for me to spar? The red-cloaked knight beside him hesitantly explained that there had been a slight misunderstanding between them in the past. Hearing that, Andrian mocked himself. Misunderstanding? Everyone knows my reputation. I must have started trouble for no reason again. To clarify everything, Andrian immediately turned to the maid standing nearby. "Hey, tell me what I did before." The maid trembled nervously. That was when your highness insulted On. Hearing this, Andrian was completely frozen. He clutched his head in frustration, cursing his past self. "What? That madman. He caused all kinds of disasters that I now have to deal with." Memories of that misunderstanding instantly returned. At the time, the fat Prince Andrian had arrogantly approached, placing his hand on On's shoulder and leering. "On, is it? Just as the rumors say, you are beautiful. What do you say? Want to become my personal maid?" Faced with that vulgar harassment, On immediately slapped his hand away and coldly warned, "Your Highness, the Knight Order is not your personal property to claim." Her blunt rejection made the fat prince so angry his face turned red, veins bulging. Back in the present, Andrian could only break out in a cold sweat, hanging his head in shame as he heard about this boda's past exploits. He thought to himself, that was clearly the pathetic attempt of a rotten scumbag trying to flirt. When facing Andrian, On bowed slightly. "It's been a while, Your Highness." But, immediately after, she coldly added, "You still haven't changed at all." Facing her coldness, the prince only scratched his head and laughed awkwardly. "Is that so? I think I've changed quite a bit." He thought. Changed a lot. Practically swapped souls entirely. On's sharp gaze narrowed suspiciously, making Andrian sweat. He told himself, this is truly the karma left by that former prince. Just then, an announcement cut through the awkward atmosphere. Vler H has arrived. The dignified commander stepped forward, stopping to look at On and ask, "You are? Her?" She immediately placed her hand over her chest and saluted respectfully. On Kurgan, Squire Knight of the Iron Legion, requesting an audience with the Count. Recognizing the young talent from the famous order, the Count nodded slightly, then sternly warned her, "Be careful, His Highness' sword is very dangerous." Hearing his uncle badmouth him right in front of his opponent, Andrian was furious. "Hey, why are you messing with my morale?" Ignoring his nephew's complaint, Vler H simply sighed. "All right," then firmly ordered both to take their positions. Standing in the castle training ground, the Count raised his hand and declared the sparring match began. Instantly, On moved with blinding speed, shooting forward like the wind. Seeing his opponent take the initiative, Andrian smirked excitedly, thinking, Let's see the true strength of the Iron Legion's hope. On swung her sword in a decisive strike. Activating her special insight, Andrian carefully observed the trajectory of her blade, assessing. Her movements are quite good. He swung his sword to meet hers, creating a fiery clash between the two mana streams. But at that very moment, the prince's weak body suddenly rebelled. Andrian coughed blood, his chest searing with pain as the system warned of mana disruption. Seizing the opening when his opponent's mana suddenly lost control, On immediately pressed forward. Not giving the prince a chance to catch his breath, On unleashed a flurry of sharp, blinding fast sword strikes. Andrian could only desperately use all his strength to block the relentless barrage. The metallic clash echoed across the training ground, truly deserving of the name Thorny Rose, everyone. Pushed back continuously by On's sharp strikes, Andrian quickly realized his disadvantage. In being forced back, this isn't good. Just as his opponent closed in at extreme speed, Andrian decided to activate the Dragon Slayer's heart. A brutal crimson murderous aura immediately blazed up, enveloping his body, making On's eyes widen in shock. Both swung their swords in a direct clash, creating a fiery explosion of opposing mana. Facing the pressure from the crimson aura, On immediately leaped back to maintain a safe distance, then charged forward again to probe. Watching her opponent's movements, she couldn't help but marvel at the prince's strange swordsmanship. Andrian breathed heavily, smirking with excitement. It seems not all single-chain knights are the same. You're on a completely different level from those other rabble. However, to secure victory, Andrian decided to activate his limited inspection privilege. Better use everything I have. Losing to a woman would be a bit embarrassing. The prince's eyes suddenly blazed, bringing up the detailed status screen of his opponent. On Kurgan, 19 years old, swordsmanship rank A, along with a host of traits befitting a true genius. Andrian spat out a small amount of blood, analyzing the fact that he could see these stats with his limited system privileges. Meant On's current strength was only equal to, or even weaker than his. The real battle was just beginning. Without a moment's hesitation, both charged at each other with terrifying speed. Andrian's crimson mana collided directly with On's blue mana. Both Andrian and On were breathing heavily, their bodies drenched in sweat after the fierce clash. Under the blazing red sunset covering the training ground, both sides temporarily retreated to catch their breath. Just then, a sword blade decisively descended. Vler H stepped between them, firmly declaring the match would stop here for today and continue tomorrow. Right when it was getting good, you're cutting the strings. Though exhausted, Andrian smirked in regret, muttering that had been about to finish the match. Not to be outdone, On also smiled challengingly, saying Shed had the same thought. She even provocatively asked if the prince wanted to go a few more rounds, asserting she was always ready. Both their stubbornness forced Vler H to shout them down. He sternly reminded them, it's too late, and ordered both to get treated immediately. Immediately after, the elderly physician rushed to Andrian's side, using green healing magic to bandage his wounds. Hearing the physician mutter about additional bruises on his body, Andrian could only glance at him in annoyance. On the other side of the arena, On was also being treated by another healer. She bowed her head slightly, silently lost in thought. As they passed each other leaving the training ground, On glanced at the fat prince, her eyes burning with determination and a silent vow. Just you wait. The fierce sparring between them showed no signs of stopping. By the third day of their confrontation, the royal knights watching could no longer hide their amazement. They admitted to being completely surprised by the former useless prince's real strength. Though On's genius was unquestionable, what the crown prince displayed was by no means inferior. Standing before the impending battle, everyone tensely hoped today would finally bring a clear winner. As Andrian and On once again faced each other with drawn swords. Before continuing the duel, Andrian suddenly smiled and spoke. Before we continue, I have something to say. Seeing the prince's attitude, On immediately grew wary, coldly interrupting. Don't tell me you're going to apologize now. I won't accept any apologies. Understanding his opponent's thoughts, Andrian assessed that she only wanted to regain her wounded pride through her own strength. That spirit was commendable, but he had something completely different in mind. Andrian waved his hand, smiling. No, not at all. We fought so fiercely. Shouldn't there be a reward? How about the loser must grant one wish to the winner? The proposal immediately shocked the surrounding knights. They began whispering in concern, knowing that with this agreement, if he lost, he'd have to do whatever the opponent asked, even kneel or bow in apology. Facing the provocative offer, On could only remain silent. Everyone around panicked, pleading with the prince to retract his words, because royal dignity didn't allow such a wager. But Andrian waved them off, telling outsiders not to interfere, then asked On directly, "What do you say, On?" After a moment of silence, On decisively stepped forward. She firmly declared that though she was merely a squire knight loyal to the Leon Beck royal family and dared not commit treason, if this was something the prince permitted, she believed she had every right to claim the reward from this bet. A once-in-a-lifetime chance to take revenge on this scumbag. Seeing her burning determination, Andrian smirked with excitement, thinking, excellent. Immediately, the battle erupted with an entirely different intensity. Their blades clashed repeatedly, creating explosive shocks and brilliant flashes across the arena. On's speed was extremely fast, but Andrian proved even more dominant, easily dodging and neutralizing her deadly strikes. Suddenly, the prince's eyes turned blood-red with bloodlust, accompanied by a cruel smile. Andrian poured all his power into activating the Dragon Slayer's killing intent, delivering a slash carrying a massive crimson energy straight down, completely suppressing On's blue mana and making her cry out in extreme pain. Facing the suffocating pressure from Andrian's blade, On was shocked by his superior speed. She thought, he wasn't this fast yesterday. Looking at the massive red dragon aura enveloping the fat prince, she couldn't help but suspect whether had been hiding his true strength. Not letting herself be shaken, On continued swinging her sword in response. Both launched relentless strikes at each other like moths to a flame. On could only grunt, struggling against the suffocating pressure from Andrian. After a pass that sent dust flying everywhere, she gasped for air, sweat pouring down. But Andrian gave her no time to rest. With blood-red eyes blazing, he poured all his power into a decisive overhead slash. The strike carried a crimson mana that collided directly with On's sword, creating a massive explosion that shook the entire training ground. The tremendous force sent On's sword flying into the air before it planted itself in the ground. On was completely defeated, kneeling on the arena floor under the blazing sunset. Witnessing this unexpected outcome, the surrounding royal knights were frozen in shock. Even Vler H couldn't hide his amazement. On stared in disbelief at her fallen sword, muttering that she couldn't accept her defeat. Andrian calmly lowered his sword and declared, "I win the bet." He stepped before the kneeling On and called firmly, "On Kurgan." Andrian, smiled triumphantly, looking straight at her as he made the victor's request. "I want you." That blunt declaration left On completely stunned and tense. Oh no, how did I fall into his trap without realizing it? Speaking of Kar, at the time he received his assignment as a night guard for the kingdom's infamous crown prince, he had mentally prepared for the worst. But contrary to his initial fears, the job wasn't nearly as difficult as had imagined. On his first day, Andrian simply glanced at him and asked, "You're the new guard knight?" The fat prince, though seemingly arrogant, only said calmly, "I'm counting on you." He never threw tantrums or caused trouble without reason like the rumors claimed. In fact, Kar often witnessed the prince persistently running and training his body every day. To be honest, the reality was completely opposite to the malicious rumors. Even during stormy nights, Andrian would still be alone, swinging his wooden sword in relentless training. Witnessing that scene under the cold rain, a nearby knight asked sympathetically, "Kar, the rain's too heavy. Should we stop His Highness now? I think we should let him burn off some fat." Just then, noticing the overloaded energy from the prince's sword swing about to erupt dangerously, he shouted in alarm, "Your Highness, danger." A loud explosion tore through the night, Andrian's slash shattering the training post into 100 pieces. Standing among the wreckage, face smeared with mud, the prince smiled excitedly. Witnessing that iron will to surpass every limit, Kar was completely convinced. He thought, "I had a feeling His Highness would become a great figure." He truly believed that, until this very moment, when the sparring match ended and Andrian firmly declared to the kneeling On, "I want you." The prince's bold declaration left the surrounding knights frozen in shock. They whispered in panic, "Huh? That's so improper." Even Kar broke into a cold sweat, his image of the great prince completely shattered. Have I been wrong about him? An bowed her head in shock for a moment. Then she looked up straight at Andrian. Is that truly what your highness wishes? But Andrian simply slung his sword over his shoulder and walked past her, coldly replying, of course. At your current level, you're just an ordinary squire. Can't even beat a scumbag prince. Andrian smirked arrogantly and declared firmly, therefore, what I want is the potential and future of the knight named An Kurjan. I need a knight who follows me, not a knight who stands beside me because of royal orders, but a knight who belongs solely to me. Andrian looked straight at An, where the status screen clearly displayed her A-rank swordsmanship talent and numerous traits of a true genius. He continued, from what I can see, you have very good sword talent. So An Kurjan, become my knight. The sincere yet authoritative invitation left An completely frozen. Faced with the prince's offer, old memories suddenly flooded An's mind. She had once become the knight she had always dreamed of, but reality was brutally cruel. Everywhere she went, she had to endure disrespectful whispers from men. Isn't she quite eye-catching? No one truly treated her as a real knight. They saw her as a novelty. To avoid being looked down upon, she tried her hardest. But no matter how many other squire knights she defeated to win convincingly, societal prejudice remained an insurmountable wall. The crowd around never stopped mocking behind her back. Isn't An just going to end up as some mobile flower decoration? Protecting a beauty like her is truly a noble task for a knight. Walking alone through those slanders, An painfully realized she could never become a true knight. But standing before that offer, An couldn't help but hesitate. She bowed her head, remembering Andrian's words about wanting her potential and future as a true knight. Looking at the fat prince standing silently under the sunset, An wondered whether those words truly came from his heart. After a moment of internal struggle, she looked up at Andrian and said softly, please promise me one thing. An requested seriously, please, your highness, treat me as a knight, not as a woman. If you can do that, I will fulfill any request you make. As a woman, I'm at a disadvantage in so many ways, so asking for a little fairness shouldn't be too much, right? Facing An's determined gaze, Andrian smiled respectfully. Without hesitation, he replied, fine, I promise you. Receiving that golden vow, An decisively stepped forward and knelt on one knee before the prince, declaring firmly, I, An, eldest daughter of House Kurjan, swear loyalty to Prince Andrian Leon Beck, and dedicate my sword and the rest of my life to your highness. Witnessing this sacred moment, all the guards in Vlur H watched in solemn silence. Andrian drew his sword, placed the blade on An's shoulder, and declared solemnly, by the true bloodline of Leon Beck, in the name of Andrian Leon Beck, I dub you a knight. Be brave, be courteous, and be loyal. The knighting ceremony ended under the radiant glow of the evening sun, marking the moment Andrian officially gained his first loyal knight. But news of this oath quickly spread and met with great public skepticism. At the academy, crowds whispered mockingly, a vow of loyalty to a scoundrel? Does that even make sense? And so they gossiped more than the drama at my neighbor's house, everyone. Young nobles constantly whispered, believing that a vow born from a bet was utterly ridiculous and they must find a way to nullify it. They suspected An of refusing help and even began weaving dark stories about her relationship with the prince. Some maliciously rumored that to save face, Andrian couldn't openly take her as a lover, so he used the guise of a knight's oath to cover up this illicit relationship. Hearing those ridiculous rumors in the palace, Andrian was furious. Insane. Am I some kind of evil villain? He turned to Carr with a helpless expression, wondering if he really was the biggest bastard in the world. Seeing the prince tearing his hair out, Carr pondered for a moment, then called, Your Highness. Andrian turned to ask what. The young attendant hesitantly brought up the prince's words from a few days ago, on the day of his final duel with An. As Andrian dazedly wondered what he meant, Carr repeated his words about not needing a knight who stood beside him only because of royal orders. Andrian went on and asked casually, Did that bother you? But it's the truth. If a royal decree came down right now ordering you elsewhere, you'd still go, wouldn't you? Andrian smiled slightly and added, If you couldn't leave, then even you could make a vow someday. Hearing that, Carr suddenly became very serious. He looked straight at the prince and asked, If I said I would make that vow, would your highness accept it? Contrary to his expectations, Andrian immediately turned away and bluntly refused. No. He crossed his arms and explained, I hate that, because raising you like that wouldn't be any fun at all. Car could only grimace and laugh helplessly. I see. Seeing his attendant's expression, Andrian firmly affirmed that he wasn't joking. He was completely serious. Just then, a royal dispatch arrived for the prince. The letter read, The Crown Prince of House Leon Beck is hereby released from house arrest and shall attend the upcoming royal banquet. Reading the letter, Andrian was completely confused, wondering what had done to be released a full month and a half early. He recalled the king's furious face, thinking, when the old man can find me here, he clearly despised me to the extreme. Andrian sighed in exasperation. I really don't understand what that old man's thinking. Seeing that, Carr asked, Your Highness isn't happy? Since your house arrest has ended. Now, Andrian replied calmly that he didn't really care. Even with his freedom, he had nowhere to go and knew no one, so there was no one to meet. Just then, a maid carrying an invitation card suddenly flinched in surprise when she encountered the prince. Seeing her strange expression, Andrian raised an eyebrow. HM? The maid trembled, bowed in apology, then hesitantly presented. It's just, I happened to see an invitation card addressed to your highness. Looking at the envelope in her hand, Andrian murmured suspiciously, An invitation? With that maid's demeanor, there's probably trouble. The maid quickly presented the card. Yes, this is it. Taking the letter and opening it, Andrian was bewildered by the words, Special Gentlemen's Social Club. The maid hesitantly explained, This is actually a social gathering where His Highness used to be a regular member. Hearing that, Andrian broke out in a cold sweat. I did? He asked curiously whether the place had anything strange about it, making the maid blush and struggle to explain. Because to women, the debauched pleasures of young noblemen were utterly unacceptable. It was essentially a club for drinking and womanizing, where the fat prince had frequently indulged himself. These guys must be from the same crowd as those playboys back home. Understanding the issue, Andrian immediately crumpled the invitation, decisively refusing. Forget it. I'm busy training. No time for such pointless gatherings. But just as he was about to throw it away, a signature at the bottom caught his eye and made him freeze. The letter was sent from the Prince Andrian's eternal friend, wise, brave, and thoughtful, Bernardo of House Yai. The name Yai immediately made Andrian change expression. He realized this name perfectly matched his memories. According to his uncle, House Yai was the last knightly family to stubbornly cling to the ancient mana heart technique, only to completely decline a century ago. The appearance of a Yai descendant immediately changed Andrian's mind. He decisively declared, It seems I must attend. Hearing the prince's order, the maid quickly bowed and left to prepare suitable attire. Standing silently in his room, Andrian stared intently at the card in his hand, sighing thoughtfully. He hoped that his old friend's family wouldn't be in too pathetic a state. I've been inside this playboy prince's body, and it's now been a full 4 months since I started my mad training to lose weight. Looking at the young prince trying on his new outfit in the mirror, the middle-aged bespectacled tailor couldn't hide his excitement, repeatedly clasping his hands and flattering. Does it meet your highness' approval? He assured that he had strictly followed all the prince's instructions. Black as the main tone. Minimalist patterns, simple design, yet still preserving the full dignity of royalty. Admiring his new appearance in the mirror, Andrian nodded, acknowledging that had indeed lost a lot of weight. The tailor immediately chimed in, exclaiming in amazement that His Highness' measurements were now less than half of what they'd been before. Thrilled by the prince's dramatic transformation, the tailor eagerly proposed to also prepare attire for the upcoming royal banquet. But Andrian immediately raised his hand to stop him, asking him to wait a bit longer, because from now until then, his measurements would surely continue to change. A few days later, when his house arrest ended, Andrian stepped onto the luxurious royal carriage, officially heading toward the Special Gentlemen's Club. Outside, imposing guard knights on horseback escorted him through the bustling streets. Sitting inside the comfortable carriage, Andrian yawned wearily, complaining, Being a prince is truly exhausting work. From clothes, to carriages to guards, everything was unbearably troublesome. Just then, he glanced across and noticed the maid shrinking herself into the corner of the carriage, barely daring to breathe, accidentally catching sight of a clear bruise on her neck. Andrian frowned and asked about the wound. The prince's question made the girl panic, quickly lowering her head and tremblingly explaining that it was entirely her own fault and His Highness had every right to punish her. Her extreme fear only made Andrian click his tongue in exasperation. He thought, just as expected from the old prince's reputation, how could this body have created such terrible urban legends of violence and tyranny? Suddenly realizing he'd seen this maid for months without ever knowing her name, Andrian softened his voice and asked, "What's your name?" The unexpected question from her master made the girl flinch. She bowed timidly and replied, "Adil Bayan, your highness." The name made Andrian freeze completely. Bayan, he pondered thoughtfully. That was an ancient family, now nearly just a name on the noble registry. He never expected to hear that legendary name again in a place like this. Distant memories flooded the old holy sword's mind. Back then, even cities, let alone kingdoms, hadn't yet existed on this continent. Among countless powerful and ferocious races, weak humans were always plundered and slaughtered as if it were natural. But humanity's tragic history was ended by great men. Through a long, grueling war, those saviors led humanity to rise above adversity, ultimately becoming the dominant race of the continent. Later generations respectfully called them the 5 Great Emperors, and one of those 5 legendary heroes fought side by side with him. The heroic woman with brilliant red hair, hand gripping her sword hilt, called out, "Groan." Standing in the blazing battlefield, she asked her sword, "Have you ever thought?" Facing the massive, ferocious horde ahead, she still calmly asked, "After this war ends, what will you and I do?" Her emerald eyes shone with iron resolve. Without waiting for an answer, she shot up into the air. "That was the great emperor. You personally beheaded the supreme leader of the monsters, permanently ending the long history of foreign races plundering. Later generations have always praised her with the dignified title, the Iron Blood Sword Marquis, Agnes Nesbayan. In the Holy Sword's memory, the Iron Blood Sword Marquis Agnes Bayan appeared heroically on the blazing battlefield. Facing the massive monster army, she swung her sword into the slaughter without mercy, unleashing her fury on the filthy creatures daring to plunder humanity. Back to the present, Andrian held his head wearily, telling himself that just thinking about those old memories was annoying. He glanced at Adil sitting timidly across from him, feeling a surge of emotion. He never expected that the descendant of the legendary House Bayan would now be a timid, pitiful maid, so reduced. What disaster had brought them so low? Just then, the carriage stopped. The guard knight opened the door and respectfully announced their arrival. Andrian stepped out, but before leaving, he turned back to tell Adil he'd speak with her later, making the young girl jump with worry. While Adil was still dazed, a smooth voice suddenly greeted him. The one who stepped forward and bowed obsequiously was Bernardo of House Yai. Looking at his fawning demeanor, Andrian assessed, "This guy looks like a sycophant." He wondered what hardships the man had endured to look so gaunt. Andrian looked at Bernardo meaningfully, thinking this trip was indeed worthwhile. Seeing the prince suddenly fall silent, Bernardo asked awkwardly, "Your Highness, what's wrong? Are you still feeling unwell?" Andrian smiled, patted his shoulder, and replied, "No, nothing. I just feel I made the right decision coming here. Thanks to that, today should be quite interesting." Indeed. With that, he casually stepped inside, leaving Bernardo behind with a bewildered and suspicious expression. Inside the banquet hall, the atmosphere of debauchery was lively. Young nobles gathered to drink, fondle, and whisper lewdly to the beauties around them. But amid the chaos, Bernardo was astonished to observe Andrian. He thought, strange, by this time, that playboy prince would normally be drunk and groping everywhere. Completely contrary to his former dissolute habits, Andrian was now perfectly sober. He sat casually on the armchair, gently swirling his wine glass and murmuring, "I don't know why. The atmosphere today feels different from before." Just then, a drunken, arrogant noble with a red face approached. He sat down uninvited next to Andrian and sneered mockingly. "I heard, Your Highness, that you've plucked that Iron Legion flower? The rumors are everywhere." Facing the prince's silence, the man pushed further. "Too bad I'm a step behind. I'd also been eyeing that woman for a while. If I'd known, I'd have accepted her oath first." He began spewing vulgar insults about On. "Even just seeing her in armor is beautiful. I can't imagine what's underneath." The disrespect to his knight's honor immediately chilled Andrian's gaze. He asked coldly, "Hey, do you have a younger brother or sister?" The noble still didn't sense the danger. "Yes. Why? Have you forgotten, Your Highness? I have one younger sibling nearby." Bernardo frowned suspiciously at the prince's strange question. Receiving the answer, Andrian smirked. Good. Then, just as the noble was about to ask what, Andrian channeled power into his fist and delivered a devastating punch straight to his face. The thunderous punch sent the noble flying backward, smashing through tables and dishes. The crash and screams filled the banquet hall. Everyone around was frozen in shock. Even Bernardo couldn't believe the prince's sudden outburst of violence. Andrian calmly approached the man on the floor, wearing a cold, merciless smile. Fortunately, your bloodline won't end. With that, he raised his foot and stomped hard on the man's groin, making him scream in agony. Looking at the scumbag writhing at his feet, Andrian radiated terrifying killing intent as he coldly declared, From now, your younger sibling will be the family heir. Andrian swung his fist and delivered another brutal blow to the noble's face, making everyone in the hall, including Bernardo of House Yai, stand frozen in terror. Before the noble could recover, Andrian stepped forward and grabbed him by the collar, lifting him up. The crowd shouted in panic, What are you doing? Your Highness. Looking straight into the battered face of the man in his grip, Andrian coldly warned, Listen carefully. I can tolerate being seen as a trash prince, but I will not be seen as someone easy to bully. His declaration left the surrounding nobles bewildered, completely unable to understand what the prince meant. I mean, you need another beating. With that, he swung his fist for another devastating blow directly to his face, making him cry out in pain before flying backward. The powerful punch sent the noble crashing to the floor, unconscious. In the silent hall, Andrian turned and called, Yai. Hearing his name, Bernardo of House Yai was so terrified he immediately fell to his knees, trembling. Why yes, Your Highness. Looking at his cowardly demeanor, Andrian smiled sinisterly, blood still on his knuckles, and said casually, I told you. Today would be interesting. Surprised? Haha. Witnessing the prince's unexpected brutality, Bernardo couldn't help but think in horror. What's wrong with this madman? Just then, Andrian stood tall and ordered him to call the guard knights. The order left Bernardo frozen for a moment. But facing the prince's terrifying pressure, he quickly scrambled up and replied firmly, I obey. Then he rushed out to summon the guards. Leaving the banquet hall in extreme tension, Andrian turned to glare at the chaos, coldly ordering, You women over there, get out. Hearing that, the noble ladies panicked and fled. Meanwhile, one noble was sweating, trying to sneak out with the women. But his steps froze when the prince's cold voice came from behind. I said, Women, you can leave if you want, but if you do, you'll be leaving as a woman. Andrian's threat made the noble tremble in fear, completely unable to move. Looking at the unconscious scumbag on the floor and the cowering nobles, Andrian smirked. Inside him, the flame of fury still burned. All this time, not one of these people had shown respect to the prince. Even just to maintain royal dignity, none of them had even the slightest respect. They not only openly mocked him to his face, they now dared to insult and dishonor his knight. Andrian turned his back to the door and asked casually, If that's the case, what charges can we bring? The banquet hall doors were immediately pushed open. The royal knights in gleaming silver armor stepped in decisively. Their leader firmly reported, For disrespecting the royal family, they are guilty of lèse-majesté, and for daring to challenge royal authority, that is high treason. The knight bowed respectfully, awaiting orders. Please give the command. Your Highness. Andrian stood before his knights and asked casually, Who should kneel first? Here? Then he smiled cruelly and concluded, Fine, let's have everyone kneel. The commotion at the club quickly reached the palace. No sooner was Andrian's restriction lifted than he was summoned to the throne. Looking at his son below, the king sighed. No sooner was your restriction lifted than you cause a major disturbance. He slammed his hand in anger. 14 noble children imprisoned. Lèse-majesté, high treason. You've attached every serious charge possible. The king asked Andrian sternly if he knew what had done, because offending 14 major noble families would surely trigger a fierce backlash. But Andrian calmly smiled arrogantly, asking back whether his father was truly worried about their reaction. He bluntly pointed out that those arrested were all useless scions already abandoned by their families, kept only to disgrace their houses. Andrian confidently suggested just sending letters to those families. The king pondered for a moment, then asked who he planned to write to. Andrian smirked. You already know the answer. Why ask? He explained that the best people to clean up the internal mess of those families were the siblings of those scumbags who had just been arrested. Andrian's sharp and cunning answer left the king completely speechless, forcing him to dismiss his son. Stepping out of the palace, the young prince couldn't hide his smug satisfaction at having silenced his father. Haha. Immediately after, Andrian went to meet the maid Adil Bayan. Seeing the young girl trembling in fear, he smiled gently and assured her he had no intention of harming her. But Adil was still so terrified she burst into tears, collapsing to her knees and asking what she had done wrong to be summoned. Looking at her extreme fear, Andrian sighed, realizing the former prince must have treated this poor girl very cruelly. He pondered the House Bayan, a legendary family now reduced to the point where their name barely appeared in the noble registry. Even the main line was completely unaware of their glorious history and peerless legacy that had been erased. Looking at the trembling Adil before him, Andrian lamented the vanished pride of her family. To examine more closely, he decided to activate his inspection privilege on Adil. The status information that appeared shocked Andrian. Adil Bayan, 17 years old, possessed S-rank swordsmanship talent and A-rank mana sensitivity. But what stunned him most were her contradictory and extreme traits. Alongside her timid, supportive, and passive submissive psychological traits, Adil also simultaneously possessed two bloodthirsty traits: Butcher, easily driven mad by the sight of blood, and War Frenzy, someone born to live only for battle. Possessing such unparalleled talent, Adil had absolutely no trait capable of controlling her inner madness. Andrian scratched his head in concern. Is it really okay if I personally unleash that bloodthirsty demon? Standing silently by the window, Andrian pondered. But then he told himself, at least I should try once. After all, S-rank talent is extremely rare. Moreover, her status screen still had one special trait he could exploit: submissive psychology, a strange trait that made the owner feel great joy in finding a master to serve devotedly. Andrian turned to Adil and called firmly, Adil Bayan, swear loyalty to me. The sudden offer left the timid maid completely bewildered, stammering to ask what he meant. Andrian looked straight into her eyes and declared seriously, I want you to become my knight. Swear it, right here, right now. Adil panicked and fell to her knees, tremblingly refusing because a lowly person like her couldn't bear such a great responsibility. Seeing that, Andrian stepped closer, reminding her she had once said her family was insignificant. He offered an enticing deal. I will take responsibility for your family. In return, swear loyalty and serve me as your master. If you can't control your madness yourself, then I will hold the reins. Hearing this, Adil looked up with tear-streaked face, asking to confirm whether the prince would truly take responsibility for her family. Receiving his nod and promise to bring her family to the capital so they could meet anytime, Adil was deeply moved. Without hesitation, she immediately prostrated herself in devotion. I, Adil Bayan, eldest daughter of House Bayan, swear loyalty to Prince Andrian Leon Beck. For the rest of my life, I will serve and dedicate myself to your highness as my master. Andrian gently placed his hand on her head and said with satisfaction, Good. Adil obediently replied, I obey. But looking at her flushed face and eyes burning with obsessive fervor, the fat prince suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Andrian broke into a cold sweat, a deep unease rising within him as he wondered, have I done the right thing? Baseless rumors once again erupted throughout the kingdom about the crown prince. People claimed that Andrian's recent silence was just a return to his old scumbag ways. They said he forced Knight On to swear loyalty through dirty means, then tricked high-ranking noble children into coming so he could beat them and throw them in prison. The height of outrage came when Andrian appointed a maid who'd never held a sword as a guard knight, leading the public to mock that he was just building a disguised harem. Sitting in his room, Andrian was exhausted and irritated by these nonsense rumors. He wondered when everyone had become so free to meddle in his affairs. He simply accepted a guard knight. Yet from morning till now, his ears were like a morning radio show. Not just outsiders, even those closest to him wouldn't let him off. The king angrily lectured that he was about to get a migraine cleaning up the mess had caused, while the prince leisurely went off enjoying himself with women. Vler H also didn't hide his disappointment, calling him a pathetic fool and asking whether had completely forgotten the bet between them. Even the third Prince Julian took the chance to drop by and mock his older brother's style of making maids into knights. He rested his chin in frustration, sighing in despair at how rumors could spread so dizzyingly fast. Just as he was exhausted, the servant announced that the queen had come to see him. Andrian could only